This is WVVA in Focus, a weekly program about important issues and events in the two Virginias.
Good morning and welcome to this edition of In Focus. I'm Melinda Zosh. Today we're talking about the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So MLK Day was held last week. That's also when Bluefield College held an event of their own. They hosted a chapel service and also handed out 2 Community Service and Justice Awards. So I want to talk about those awards and those recipients in just a bit, but first I'm joined with the keynote speaker of that chapel service, which was held at Bluefield College last week, Dr. Johnny Hill. Dr. Hill, thank you so much for joining us on this Sunday morning.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. Talk to us about your background. Where do you currently work? What university are you at? And then let's go into what your knowledge of Dr. King and your passion about him.
Sure. I currently serve as Dean of the Shaw University Divinity School in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I'm originally from Georgia, the same state that Dr. King is from. I grew up on the edge of an old plantation in the belly of the South. And I've had the privilege of traveling all around the world, and now I get the joy of sharing the message of Dr. King's legacy to communities far and wide.
Where did your passion for Dr. King and his work, where did that come from? Was it growing up in Georgia or something else that just sparked your interest in
Sure, it was rooted in my experience growing up in Southeast Georgia. So I witnessed a lot of struggle from not just among African American communities, but poor white communities as well. So I was sensitized to the reality of human suffering very early on in my experience. And so that laid the foundation for my desire to want to make a difference in the world, to speak to issues of injustice, to work toward fairness and building community for people of different backgrounds.
So you touched on many points in your speech that you made Wednesday at Bluefield College. A few things stood out to me. One of them, you said, the ushering in of a new global society is upon us. What did you mean by that?
Well, the fact is that the world is changing like never before. We live in a global age, from social media to the opportunities to travel across the world in the blink of an eye, to the realities of mainstream mass communication that now creates an opportunity for us to know different people from different parts of the world on a regular basis. And so our challenge is to live into the reality that is already present and among us, which is that we live in a global world, and Dr. King's vision of the World House creates a vision of inclusivity, of justice, of fairness for communities both locally and nationally as well.
Okay, I'd actually like to air a bit of your speech that you gave at Bluefield College on Wednesday, so I'd like to take a moment and we can look at that, and then I want to get your thoughts on that some more.
As we have learned from that great philosopher Mikhail Foucault, the moment we begin to attach meanings to categories and concepts, such as race or gender or ethnicity, it often leads us to a power play of attaching meaning with words and with symbols. So as we think about the legacy of Dr. King today, how he challenges us to not only celebrate our differences, but to work together to imagine a world where we can walk hand in hand, feet and feet, breast and breast, mind and mind, toward a better, stronger tomorrow. It offers up an opportunity to be invited into a larger, grander vision of the world as well.
All right, so I'd like to ask you, and then there's some more footage. If you missed the event, it actually was a packed audience as well. But I'd like to ask you more on what did you mean by that specifically about celebrating our differences?
Well, I draw that language of celebration of differences from Desmond Mpelo Tutu, who was the Archbishop in South Africa in Cape Town. And he talked about the importance of not just tolerance. So we have to move beyond tolerance, tolerating differences, in terms of just sort of passively going about the world, accepting the differences of persons just because we have to live together in society. What Desmond Tutu talks about and what Dr. King affirms in his work as well is celebrating differences. That is when we embrace differences as a part of God's tapestry and plethora of differences in the world, that it becomes a joy, something to appreciate and to affirm as part of the reflection of human life and nature.
Now, Dr. King was assassinated in 1968, so there are folks still alive who remember when that happened, but there's a lot of younger folks who do not remember that. They do not remember Dr. King when he was alive. What do you try to teach the younger generation about Dr. King, those who never knew him or saw him on TV or saw his speeches?
Sure. On April 4th, 1968, Dr. King was assassinated on the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. He was in Memphis, Tennessee, marching with sanitation workers, trying to push for and advance a sense of equality among those who were working. But the underlying commitment that he had was to push toward an inclusive society where all are treated equally and fairly. And so part of the challenge is to reintroduce Dr. King and his legacy for today's generation so that we are aware that the current progress we've made didn't come by accident. That a lot of people had to sacrifice, and Dr. King was one of them, to make it possible for us to live together in community. But it also lets us know that we have to work even harder to continue to advance racial justice, inclusivity, and fairness for all of God's children.
What are the greatest challenges in the modern era for attaining justice and equality?
I think the greatest barrier is that we don't know each other very well. We have to learn how to tell our stories, and we have to attack systemic racism as well. So it's not just that we need to get to know each other a lot better. We need to tell our stories and have the courage to have transparency and vulnerability toward those who are different from us. But we also have to take on those systemic issues that continue to impact our way of being as well. So we have to find ways to attack issues of poverty or police brutality or other concerns that impact the marginalized communities and those most vulnerable among us.
Right. There was also a panel discussion held at Bluefield College as well, and Dr. Hill, you were a part of that. And one thing that stood out to me about that is it's hard to not like someone if you're close to them and if you get to know them. So touch on that a little bit about being close to someone, getting to know them, and how when you get to know someone, it's hard not to like them.
Absolutely. So we had the joy of reviewing Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail on the panel. And one of the pieces of that letter talks about the challenge of going beyond provincialism, going beyond this notion that somehow we can live and exist in our own isolated bubbles without being aware that we're caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny, such that whatever impacts one person directly will impact others indirectly, and conversely, so whatever impacts others indirectly may impact us directly. So we have to be aware of our interconnectedness and interrelatedness in the ways in which we experience the world on a regular basis. So we have to find ways to break through the barriers of living in our own tight little bubbles and reach out to have the courage to get to know folks who are different from us, to share our stories, to volunteer for organizations and institutions that engage differences, and to also work toward policies that help to encourage human community as well.
All right, that really is a resounding message. So Dr. Hill, thank you for joining us in this segment, but please stay with us. We have a lot more to talk about, including we have some recipients of the Justice Awards coming in to talk about what the awards mean to them, and they were also part of the panel at Bluefield College, so I'll be discussing that with them as well, so stay with us. Good morning and welcome back to this edition of In Focus. I'm Melinda Zosh. This morning we've been talking all about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his impact on the world. And we've also been hearing from Dr. Johnny Hill. He's a King Scholar and Dean of the School of Divinity at Shaw University. He was the keynote speaker at Bluefield College's MLK event, which was actually held last Wednesday. But joining me now are two local pastors who have been honored with the Community Service and Justice Awards. So those pastors join me now, Bishop Frederick Brown and Reverend Garry Moore Sr. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
So why don't you both tell us a little bit about your backgrounds and what churches you're at now?
All right. Well, I am the senior pastor of Faith Center Church here in the city of Bluefield. I've been there 25 years. Originally from McDowell County. I'm a Marshall University graduate and also a graduate of Rhema Bible Training Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and just happy and honored to serve the community.
All right, and you're also part of the panel discussion, so we'll talk about that in just a bit. Reverend Moore, talk to us about your background.
Sure, my name is Garry Moore, and I've been the pastor of Scott Street Baptist Church for almost 30 years, 29 years this year. And I grew up in Lynchburg, Virginia. Love talking to about Divinity University. Yeah. Grew up in Lynchburg and graduated from Amherst High there. And then from there, I went on to a group called Up With People and was with them for 3 years. And then I was called into the ministry in Los Angeles, California, came back home to Lynchburg, announced my call into the ministry, was ordained there, and went to Bluefield College, got my undergraduate degree there, and also my master's degree from Virginia Union University in Richmond.
So what led you both to the ministry? What was it? Was it a parent, a friend, something else that led you into the ministry?
Well, I actually got involved in church when I was 9 years old as a musician. And just being in that atmosphere, just kind of sensed the call of God and a desire to want to minister His word and to minister to people, see lives changed. And so my total years of ministry has been 31 years now, 25 years of pastoring. So I would have to say the call is what has really drawn me into ministry and has kept me pretty stable down through the years.
And Reverend Moore?
Yeah, I agree with that call, but I was called when I was 18, but I ran for 5 years before I, tried to actually did it, and I knew what I was going to have to do at a very young age, but for most preachers, including the prophets in the Bible, most of them ran from that particular call prior to actually accepting this. And it's a call to service. It's not necessarily something that you, as a kid, grew up wanting to do, but it is something that actually calls you and compels you to do something to make the lives of the people you contact better.
What has been each of your biggest challenges over the years in each of your callings, would you say, in the ministry?
I think the biggest challenge for me, of course, especially when you're in a city in a small rural area like Bluefield, West Virginia, just kind of the demographics and the logistics of everything. I'm a person I would consider to say I have a fairly big vision that's more global than it is local. So that can present challenges because you travel the world, you see all of the big major things happening all over the world, and now you have to try to localize that in a small rural area like Bluefield, West Virginia. But, for the most part, we've been pretty successful with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Reverend Moore?
One of the greatest challenges I've seen in 37, almost 38 years of ministry now is the pulling of people together who don't necessarily want to be together. I'm not talking about saints and sinners. I'm not even talking about black and white, but people who are just different. At this particular age and stage of our development as human beings, I think it's appalling, for example, that not everybody is eating 3 meals a day. I think with the great wealth that the world has right now, nobody should be hungry any given day in our society. And for that to happen, the dialogue has to happen not just beyond race, it's got to be beyond culture. And soon as we get to the point where we're seeing beyond ourselves, the world will be a better place.
Now, both of you and Dr. Hill were part of the panel discussion, as we had mentioned, but I want to ask you, what stood out to you the most about the panel, whether it was a question from the audience or something that one of you said? What stood out to you about that panel discussion at Bluefield College?
I think first for me, I was just really excited to see that many people engaged in terms of the conversation. One of my concerns, even concerning things like MLK Day and the history and the celebrations of Martin Luther King and grabbing the content of his message and being able to carry it into the next generation. My concern is if we have another generation coming after us that's going to continue the legacy and those types of things. And so I would have to say, after being at Bluefield College today, the answer is yes, because we had, we just had so much interaction and involvement with students and people from the community. One of the things that specifically sticks out in my mind is one of the ladies that spoke up and was asking the question, why aren't racism issues attacked in churches? And that really stood out to me, especially when she said she was a Christian, but that she doesn't go to church, and she expressed that that's one of the reasons why. And anytime people say they don't go to church, I take that very personal, because that's my conviction, and my desire is to see everyone in church, involved in church, for a sense of belonging, a sense of redemption and healing, and also for a sense of being motivated to go out and affect the community. I think our churches serve from that capacity.
Yeah, and I do remember that woman asking that question, and then Reverend Moore, you, I think, answered her a little bit by saying, you know, it could be something to do with families, or...
Yeah, well, see, the one thing that stuck out in my mind in that room was the power of God that was actually there. Whether people want to acknowledge him or not, he was in the room, because when people can discuss and at length and get off their chest what they want to say, and people are not hostile towards each other, I think that's an amazing feat. For example, my wife is our choir director, you know, and basically all of us are singing the same song, but if we're singing in harmony, we're singing a different note. And so that doesn't mean that we all have to do it like each other or say it like each other, but when you are really singing, I mean, when you're really singing a song beautifully, and you got the sopranos and the altos and tenors and the basses, you're singing a different note if you're singing it right, but you're singing the same song. That's what America hadn't learned to do, and that's why we are losing our global imprint around the world, is because we are not in harmony with each other. I don't think that our states are united right now. And once we get to the point where we are looking beyond race, looking beyond gender, beyond all of these things that actually divide us, I think we'll see each other and respect each other for who we are.
I mean, do you think it's because we don't know enough about each other? It's almost like we live in these little bubbles, little communities, or as someone had mentioned, fragmented realities with social media, right?
Exactly.
Do you think that's why we're just like kind of living in our own little compartmentalized worlds? Bishop Brown, what do you think?
I do. I think so. And I think the world has taught us how to live in our own world. You know, I just think we're very selfish people in the world right now. Going back to something that Reverend Moore said when he's talking about the homelessness, when you're talking about people in the 21st century not having meals, those types of things. It just shows our selfishness overall as people of every culture. We can just become very, very selfish people, and I think this is something that has to be corrected, and that's why we need more events like what took place at Bluefield College today, because we're able, again, as Reverend Moore has stated, we're able to come together, and a reference was made talking about our church services that, you know, the difference between predominantly white churches, predominantly black churches is that predominantly white churches clap on 1 and 3, and predominantly black churches clap on 2 and 4. Well, my thought about that is, if you're clapping on 1 and 3 and we're clapping on 2 and 4, we're not going to miss a beat.
We got it covered.
So we have everything covered.
That's a good point.
And so that moves us from being selfish to, again, to celebrating our differences and our cultures, but understanding that it's a big world out here that really needs our unity.
That's right. And with everyone working together, you certainly wouldn't miss a beat in that case,
Exactly,
right?
Exactly.
All right, well, stay with us. We have a lot more to talk about, and coming up next, Dr. Hill will rejoin us. So I'd like to air a portion of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. So I want to air that and then get all of your reaction to that. So let's take a look.
My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
All right, so what's your reaction to seeing Dr. King give that speech? To me, it's powerful, seeing video of him just giving that speech and the crowd cheering, but what is each of your reaction to that?
For me, listening to the Dr. King speech, which I've done all of my life, literally, every time I listen to it now, chills still just kind of go through my body. Listening to a man that has gone through so much in life to stand for justice, not only just for African American people, but to stand against the injustices of a nation. Listening to him talking about that one day I desire for that my children are going to be able to live in a place where they're not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Unfortunately, I think to some degree we're still dreaming. I believe that we've come and we've made some great strides, but I still believe that in a lot of ways we're still dreaming. But I believe that if we can continue the legacy and to continue the content of Dr. King's message, we will begin to continue things to where progress is inevitable.
And Dr. Hill, what do you think of that?
Absolutely. I feel a sense of urgency when I hear Dr. King's speech. I resonate with it very deeply on a very personal level. But I also think about that although it's been over 56 years since he delivered that speech in August of 1963, I feel a sense of urgency to work alongside of colleagues and friends in the community to push toward racial justice, that vision of the World House, and awaken the dream, because I think that the bishop is absolutely correct. The dream is being lost within the haze of the overwhelming challenges facing our world today, from poverty to mass incarceration to the problem of immigration reform and the tension with building a wall at the southern border. All of these things like that distort Dr. King's vision of inclusivity and equality for all human beings. So I feel a sense of urgency, and I still get inspired by that speech. I think it's time to awaken the dream, once again for this generation.
Right, and you made a good point, Dr. Hill. That speech was made in 1963, and Reverend Moore, I'll ask you this question. Do you feel like we've made quite a bit of progress since that speech was made in 1963, or what Bishop Brown said, that we have a long way to go still?
We still have a great deal to do, especially as far as the spirit of Dr. King is concerned, and the spirit of our Lord is concerned, as far as being inclusive of everybody. I was amazed, number one, at his age when he actually said these words. Dr. King was assassinated when he was 39, which is basically a young man by today's term as far as the ministry is concerned. And he got started with the civil rights movement when he was only 27. And so by him saying that and wanting a better life for the next generation and talking about his girls, I think all of us want the next generation to be better than the previous one.
And we actually do have some video of Dr. King that I would like to air, and I'd just like to get your reaction to it. This is a news clip that had aired back in the 1960s, but I mean, what is your reaction just seeing Dr. King in action, interacting with people, and just it's powerful to me. What's your reaction to that?
Absolutely. I think it's extraordinary that Dr. King not only sat with world leaders, he was sitting with Lyndon Baines Johnson in that particular clip, but he was also marching alongside ordinary citizens in local communities as well. This may have been the march, the Selma March, over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. So he was not only making connections between grassroots organizing, connecting with local communities, but also looking at the broader picture of policies that led him to engage the president at the time over the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
And at the end of that clip, we also saw some monuments that have been dedicated to Dr. King. So what do you think is Dr. King's legacy in today's era? And anyone can answer that.
Oh, sure. I think his legacy is a legacy of inclusivity, a vision of the World House, that we're all part of one great, big, wonderful human family. And we have to learn how to live together as brothers and sisters, or we shall perish as fools. So I think his great, most abiding legacy is that at the end of the day, even in spite of all of the great challenges we face, that we are ultimately all human beings striving to be human together. And he's given us a gift of a vision on how to do that through peace, nonviolence, and through the pursuit of justice.
Right. And Dr. King would have turned 90 this month,
Wow.
right? Isn't that astounding?
Yeah, it really is.
That he would have turned 90, but his life was cut short at 39 years old. What do you think he could have accomplished if he had lived until 90 or beyond?
Well, one thing we know for sure, with his forcefulness and the authority in which he would communicate, we know without question that we could have been much further down the road in terms of race relations and just humanity as a whole. We could be much further down the road with someone being as forceful as he has been, you know, in years past. We still have some great civil rights leaders that's here, but the authority in which Dr. King operated, it's very hard to duplicate that.
Yeah.
And you saw the people he had helping him. Andy Young was United Methodist. I mean, in other words, we've got to cross all of these barriers. The names on the outside of the doors shouldn't matter as much as the people that are inside. And that's what Dr. King was more concerned about. If he could get Rabbi Abraham Heschel, for example, to help him, he would do that. To much of the chagrin of the Christian community, when it takes everybody pulling together to make the world a better place. And I think that's so important. And we can't, this world is too small for us to fear each other anymore.
Right. It's time really to get to know one another, get to know your neighbor, who you live next to, who you work next to, and just take the time to know that person as a person, and without judgment, not just like, you know, oh, this person's a different age than me or whatever. No, get to know your neighbor a little bit.
Absolutely.
I think that's the message that he would leave behind. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on this edition of In Focus.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
See you all next Sunday.